about what it means to live in North Korea and how hunger and death are your companions there. She was trafficked to China and sold to a man who used her as a slave, then sent to prison in China. From there, she was repatriated in North Korea, where the camp was worse than the Chinese prison. She will tell you how it feels and how now she lives in the UK. She still helps others to escape dreadful life in North Korea. We will hear from Sarah, a volunteer at the Snowdrop Project, how while in foster care here in the UK, she was groomed at 12 by a man who was very nice and spoiled her and friends before 1 year after starting to have her gang raped, etc., etc. She escaped at 19. She will speak of the failures of the system of all way through in the UK, how to protect children. Sarah will sit beside me because she doesn't want any photo or filming. Jess Graham, who works for Survivors Inc., was married to someone who became a trafficker and a slaver. And she will tell us how it all started and what goes into the mind of someone who becomes a trafficker of women. Ajit Singh, founder of Guriya in India, will tell us how the justice system in India, and the #1 country for slaves in the world, doesn't work, and how few prosecution ever happens. And Alice Safed, the #2 of BRAC, the biggest NGO in the world, in Bangladesh, will speak about the Rohingya arriving in hundreds of thousands in Bangladesh and how it tries to protect women from the traffickers. Please come on stage after the video or during the video. Kevin Island, that you know, will moderate the panel.
More than 40 million people were trapped in modern slavery last year, according to landmark new data. This new figure includes victims of forced labor, forced marriage, and sexual exploitation. 1 in 4 slaves worldwide is a child. Nearly 2/3 of the world's slaves are found in the Asia and Pacific region, with about 1/4 located in Africa. Slaves, many of them men, are an invisible army of workers, stripped of their rights and humanity, whether hidden inside factories and fishing boats or exploited on cocoa plantations and in mines. In West Africa, children are forced to harvest cocoa, which is sold to the world's major chocolate companies. In India, children are used to mine mica, the mineral that makes eyeshadow and car paint sparkle. Migrants trapped on Thai fishing boats are often lured from their homes with promises of well-paid jobs, only to find themselves trafficked and stuck out at sea. And it's not just happening in poorer areas of the world. Slavery is happening right under our noses, in cities like Paris, New York, and here in London. Survivors of slavery suffer stigma, discrimination, and trauma as they try to rebuild their lives. Their needs are many: counseling, healthcare, housing, education, and jobs. These challenges leave former slaves at risk of being re-trafficked or even turning to criminality to escape the cycle of slavery. But in countries from India to the United States, charities and companies alike are helping survivors of slavery to learn skills and to find work. Many survivors are coming together, speaking out, and sharing their suffering. They are not only shining a spotlight on the often hidden crime, but educating people on how to spot the signs of slavery and trafficking and what they can do.
So, good morning, and it's a real honour for me to be sat here on such a panel. As you heard in my earlier speech, I said that the people here are my boss, and so I'm here in front of my boss, really, hosting this panel today. But I think this panel is one of the most important panels that we will hear from, because we're hearing about the true issues of what modern slavery looks like. And just on this panel alone, we have India, Bangladesh, the USA, North Korea, and the UK. And that is a real signal of how global an issue this is, and all the different types of exploitation that are occurring. So I'm first going to come to you, Ajit, from the perspective of India, and how the problems in India are so real, and particularly around the low levels of prosecution and the way that there is perhaps a failing in the state support. So how is that manifesting itself, and what is the situation in India?
Well, as everybody knows, India has the highest number of persons living in slavery. And unfortunately, most of it goes unreported. And what I see is even the TIP report latest says, there are hardly 4,000 reported cases. As per my own research, Guria's research, we found only 250 trafficked minor girls were rescued from brothels each year in 2010, 11, and 12. We rushed to the Honorable Supreme Court of India and we told them, look, at least from the government figures, 1.2 million, I repeat, 1.2 million trafficked minor girls need to be rescued from the brothels. It's known as the public interest litigation. It is still pending in the Supreme Court of India. It is just going on, And this is, mind you, the government figure I'm telling you. Things are much beyond this number. Actually, the main problem is in India, it's not about laws, etc. It's about implementation, to put it in real straight words. And in spite of the government taking interest now that there's international pressure and everything, the Indian government is really trying to do something. But the real issue is now the corruption and impunity. As Monique also said in her speech, impunity, you can get away with anything. You see, I'll give you one example. Just one example. It's happened just a few months back. 42 survivors were re-trafficked from a government protection home. And we told them, look, your girls are gone. We made a complaint. And then they at least filed a case. None of the girls have been recovered, except one trafficker. None of them has gone to jail, you see. And these survivors were rescued in the biggest ever rescue operation, where 61 brothels were seized. And the whole case is being supervised by the Supreme Court of India. Look at the ultimate level, I'm just, one example is enough to tell you what is happening actually, and still, nothing is happening. They could dare to do this. This is really atrocious. Now, after rescue, the major problem is basically there are a lot of challenges. It's so multi-dimensional, it's so difficult to put it in 1, 2, 3, but well, I'll try and figure it out, for you. And the first learning is to take the survivor out of trauma, because most of the time survivors refuse to get rescued as well. The trauma is, the enslavement is at such level. And what happens is basically we support them with counselors, with interpreters, and we try and help them with all the belongings, the incomes that they have had, in the brothels. If they have children, we try and get their children with them, We try to segregate them with the brothel keepers and pimps. So what happens is basically we work very hard to get the girl out of trauma and to speak the truth. Because if she doesn't speak the truth, then it's a big mess in the very beginning, And truth in what sense? Truth in terms of her name, her age, her parentage, her address, because everything is like, she's been tutored. So, and because we want the best complaint to be lodged, because this complaint is going to go till the end, and this is the beginning of the thing. So, we try and focus a lot on this whole complaint, and we offer ourselves as complainant or witnesses. Why witnesses? Because of want of witnesses, there is acquittal in all the cases, most of the cases, I tell you. In 2014, I think it's in the TIP report, the acquittal rate is 80%, about 80%, So can you imagine? You do all the circus for so many years and ultimately it's all zero. And what else I feel is basically the medical examination of the girls, it takes 5 to 10 days. What will you get in 10 days time, But most of the time this way is happening, They don't arrest the traffickers immediately. And what else happens is basically the investigation is very, very biased, and because of biased investigation, they come down to very faulty charge sheets. And now, when you have complete wrong charge sheet, the traffickers take advantage of it. From the higher court, they get, the bails rejected, they get proceeding stay, they get arrest stays, and so, most of the time, the trafficker absconds. Why? Because police never tries to verify their name, their age, their parentage, their address. Nowhere to be found. When the trial begins, where is the trafficker? Nowhere to be found, So that's a big issue, At the same time, we fight the custody, because the same brothel keepers come in the name of uncles and aunts with fake documents and want to take away the girls, the survivors. So we have to work on that, and parallelly we work on the bails. As a strategy, what we have done is basically, because conviction will take 20 years in India. You never know when it will happen, And by the time the survivor is exhausted, she goes hostile, She has no energy to carry on the case. So it's a big trouble for the girl, And if by chance he gets a bail, he will tamper with the evidences, And next what comes is, after this, the brothel seizure, immediately it should be there. We want to cut the income levels. In a nutshell, what I want to say is the strategy is end to end, We have just one benchmark in mind, saving lives, We don't see reports, we don't see our project, budget, this, that, It's just like a bull we have to go, and head on, The only thing is the head and the heart must connect. That is very important, at least on the issue like this, And lastly, I think we also work on the witness protection, because we don't have witness protection. So we've been hiding girls here and there, working on our own self. We don't stop anywhere. The whole idea is, no, we have to keep moving, innovating. And we also work on mock trials. And then there are challenges regarding, this is the last point, sir. The challenges regarding, like the protection homes are not well done, the witness, the homes are in a bad shape, then there's no compensation in time, there's problem of the medical boards, So they don't work in synergy, the stakeholders that are supposed to take action, actually. So it's a big mess at that level also. And as I see, lastly, the rehabilitation and the reintegration part also suffers because of the institutional problem, yes, but also because of the social stigma. And this social stigma is also responsible for the cases being unreported, which I said in the very beginning. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, and you've raised some really good points there. And just as in a brief resume, really, what do you think is needed? Is this something that needs a national action plan? Is it something that needs to come from the government level that actually then joins all this strategy up? Do you think that's what was required? Or is there a national action plan in India?
I don't think they don't have any action plan as such. They have advisory committee and all. Lot of laws are there. One more new law is coming. That is why I said, instead of laws, whatever we have to build upon what we have today. So that's the main thing that I think. And I must say, instead of looking at very in a far-sighted way, I want to look at times in a very short-sighted way, because here immediately, in getting justice in the long run, we miss out the immediate the survivors. So I think the police must be divided into two. The investigation and the policing must go separately, And then the whole criminal justice system is not gender sensitive at all. That's the immediate one that we can do, actually, And what else? I had one more point with me is like the impunity thing that I said, at least let's begin from the sexual violence part, no one should enjoy any impunity in the case of sexual violence cases, The country can begin from here, right? Sure. And one last word I have to say is, there's one word, a new word that is just added to the Oxford Dictionary, In India, and everybody knows, that's jugaad. Jugaad is much more than innovation, You fiddle around left, right, up, down, in a context like India, you just have to have a jugaad, that innovative way to come to results and conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And clearly your passion really plays out. And Asif, from the part of Bangladesh, What is the situation there? I imagine much of it reflects
Absolutely.
what we just heard from
It's
Ajit.
not very different, right? I mean, Ajit mentioned of social stigma. I think one thing is that there's a national stigma in terms of admitting that this is happening. And Bangladesh and India are they're neighboring countries. So the bulk of the sort of source of trafficking that happens, cross-border trafficking that happens, comes from Bangladesh as well. But just to give some context is that, I know Kevin showed a picture a little while ago on a Bangladeshi, in a coastal area where the mangrove forest is there. I mean, all these issues are so much connected. The area that he showed is one of the poorest area, is basically very prone to climate change. The lands have been very saline, so it's, you cannot cultivate anything. So it's a lack of livelihood, which basically creates vulnerability, desperation, and chronic poverty, right? So Bangladesh has done quite well in terms of getting out of poverty over the last 20, 25 years. But in terms of sheer number, we have about 12.5% people who are extreme poor. So that's about 20 million. So Bangladesh is like a very small, just to give some context, is a densely populated country. It's like 160 million people packed in a size of New York State. So half the population of US in New York, imagine how dense it is. And so 20 million, if you think about extreme poor, so a lot of this desperation and vulnerability is coming out of that. So we cannot kind of isolate that issue from why trafficking is happening. And the other hand, as I was mentioning, that there's almost like a national denial about that this actually is taking place. Not only the social taboo, but at the same time, you can't use the words like slavery and stuff in Bangladesh, right? So the government will react very badly about that. But in terms of numbers, we basically, the numbers that came out in a recent research, very hard to find data, but looking at about roughly 15,000 to 20,000 people officially, or not officially, but through numbers that are going cross-border to India, mostly India. And so this sort of chronic poverty is kind of also leading to issues like sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, forced labor, all sorts of things. And on top of that, similar issues around lack of enforcement, right? I mean, we recently had brought in all the stakeholders together, including the police. I mean, there are change makers within various units, but they feel very isolated.
But why do you think, you both said about impunity or lack of enforcement, why do you think that's the culture? Is it because it isn't seen as a crime, or do you think it's just too difficult?
I think it's also admitting, it would mean that you admit to corruption, because it's a state level corruption as well that leads to this lack of individual security, right? So if you start working on these, and the complex political economy, you will actually see that very powerful people on the very top are also involved in this chain, because it's a lucrative market. Recently this year, Bangladesh has dropped in the TIP report from tier 2 to tier 2 watch list. So, and that basically highlights how little prosecution has happened over the last year as well. But what also has made this year very interesting is basically this rapid arrival of Rohingya refugees. August 25th, the very, very rapid influx has started, and about 650,000 people have been forcefully displaced from Myanmar. And astoundingly, about 65% of this population are young women and children.
And has there been a global response to that from the UN or any support?
And there has been, but what it's not adequate. I don't think if you're not there, you actually don't understand the massive scale of the vulnerability and the crisis that is there. It's basically, I don't think in decades, such a massive scale of ethnic cleansing has happened.
Sure. Do you think, actually, if you've got all these issues already where this isn't taken seriously against people in your own country, do you think they're ever going to take it seriously against people that are arriving from Myanmar?
I mean, basically, to a trafficker, it doesn't matter whether it's a Bangladeshi or a refugee. I mean, Kevin was mentioning the drop of the price. I mean, yesterday there was a Sky News report, which basically showed women from the refugee community are being sold for £5, as little as £5. And that area where they're coming in was already a human trafficking ring. So that has placed all of these refugees under extreme vulnerable position. And I can talk a little bit about what we are doing to fix it. But it's a very, very challenging situation over there. So, so the people, I mean, particularly for women, every single person has a story of horror. And then on top of that, you know, they are now exposed to a situation where they are being exploited by the traffickers.
Thank you. Jessica, you've got an incredible story that, you know, again, I think you may be talking about impunity. Again, now we're talking about in the USA, but what is your account and how are you involved?
Well, by this point, most of you have heard Jennifer's story and how she was trafficked and how she had met her Prince Charming, and he was this great, wonderful man who was going to take care of her, and he turned into a monster. That monster was my estranged husband. And before he was trafficking Jennifer, he had already had severe emotional distress in his life. He had mental stress. He had been sexually abused at the hands of his own mother, and had already been through different things in his life that were making him, you know, harder to be able to get through life. When I met him myself, I experienced the same thing Jennifer did. He was this great, wonderful man who, you know, sweeps you off your feet. He's Prince Charming. He's wonderful. He's going to do everything for you. When I met him, he had a great job. He was successful. He also was dealing drugs. To the extent that I wasn't aware of everything that he was doing. I was aware of some. I was young and stupid, and to me, it didn't matter. When I became pregnant with my first child, I had chosen to tell him that he needed to be honest with his work, because now we had a child to raise. And at that time, right before I had her, he had gotten into a car accident and was put on severe medications that his doctor ended up being shut down by the government because he was running what we call a pill mill. And Salem had become addicted severely to pharmaceutical drugs. And when the doctor cut him off, he then turned to heroin. At that point, I had left him. He had come back to me again and said, look, I want to, you know, fix things. I want to take care of my family. I was then pregnant with our second child. And I took it as he really wanted help. And he was just spiraling out of control, and I thought I was going to help him. And he had shown severe control issues. He had to have control of everything in my life. He didn't want me talking to certain people. He wanted to make sure that I was working where I said, when I said. He would show up unexpectedly. He would send friends in to check on me. He was very demanding on how things were ran with our children and in the household and, you know, every aspect of everyday life. And to me, at first, it was, oh, he cares. He wants to be around. He wants to, you know, be every part of my life. And I thought this was a good thing. And after a while, it started to seem as though that wasn't okay. I had spoke with girls he had been with in the past, and they said that he had exhibited the same controlling behavior, and it turned violent. The more drug usage there was, the less he was being productive at work, the more he was relying on me. I was working 1 and 2 jobs at a time to support him and myself. And when I had our second child, I had decided that after finding out he was using heroin, that it was time to leave. And he had turned into this horrible, nasty person who also had become abusive. He would fight with me. He would try to beat me up. He would try to...
You were telling me last night, though, about other women that he's been controlling, and particularly since. And how does that look?
So when he was with Jennifer, his control took another step forward. I ended up leaving him and taking off my children, which is probably what saved me from having to go what Jennifer went through. So whenever he went to Jennifer, he did the whole Prince Charming thing again. He was taking care of her. He was taking care of her daughter. Everything was just wonderful. You know, her previous boyfriend had been put in jail, and so here she is with this child. There's no father, and Salem was this father figure and this wonderful person, and he was going to take care of her. And when he was running out of money, he needed to feed that money off of her. And his drug addiction just got stronger and stronger and stronger, and he always had this greed about him that he always had to have money. And if it didn't come from him, he was going to find a way to get it from somebody else. So he met with other people who were also using drugs, and they had this nice apartment, they had all this money, and he wanted to know how to have that lifestyle and still balance, you know, his addiction on top of that. And that's whenever they taught him how to groom. First, Jennifer. There's been other girls since Jennifer. He's also tried to use control with me over our children. I have 2 daughters with him. He has not made it easy for me to divorce him. We are still married.
Last night you were telling me about there's some other women that he's now with, and,
Yes.
and you've
So
tried to report this to the
recently,
police. And
He spoke with me, and I ran into him, and he was on drugs. He has moved himself now on my street to be closer to me and my daughters, which is not safe because he has tried to traffic them. But he confided in me, which I found odd, and I contributed to the amount of drugs he was using, that he is still, to this day, after going into hiding for a while when Jennifer first put it out there of what everything had happened, he is still trafficking women to this day and has 3 women in his control in his house.
And you were saying something that you've tried to raise this with the
I've
law
tried to raise it
enforcement.
with the police, and when you take these issues to our police, you know, to them, he's a minor offense because he's only got 3 girls. You've
So
got
the
3
impunity
women.
exists again.
Yes, very much so. And you can take it to them and tell them, and they want solid proof, but they also want to take down somebody who's got more going on. They need somebody with more. He's not only trafficking these women, he's still trafficking drugs. And you can literally hand it over. I have them on voice record. They're not interested in it. It's not big enough for them. Our human trafficking task force exists of 4 police officers. Only 2 of them are active, and they only get to about 10% of their pile of everything
So again,
that comes in.
it's resources, the legislation's there, but people aren't responding to it.
Yes.
So, thank you. Jihan, from your perspective of North Korea, obviously very much in the media at the moment, can you just tell us what your account is?
Thank you. Mom, why did you abandon me? My 12-year-old child asked me, and that questions and changed my life. I searched for an answer, but can't find one. Where can I possibly begin? What does he remember? He was very young when I left him in China to save him from going to prison in North Korea. Being a victim of human trafficking gave me disgrace, humiliation, and painful memories that I wanted to hide and bury in my heart. But I am now an anti-human trafficking activist because if I do not do this, many other North Korean women's stories will be untold, and they will be buried with their stories. So today, I have to decide to tell my story and to be messenger of many North Koreans who you will never meet. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are free and equality with the right of life, liberty, and security. Apart from in North Korea, in the country I was born, these basic of human rights do not exist. North Koreans are stripped of their individuality, and the people are turned into slaves. Grow up, my father, who was a faithful work party member, taught me respectful toward the religion just to fellow my citizens. However, we got returned received were families torn apart by famine and orphaned children. In 1996, My uncle died of starvation in front of me. He died. He no longer resembled of human beings, as a mere skin and bones. But it wasn't only me to helplessly watch to loved one die. During the period as known as Ozo's March, more than 3 million North Koreans died of starvation. North Koreans decided to risk escaping. I did too. I was promised an honest, well-paid job in China and a safe way out for my brother. In doing so, I abandoned the country, has promised to me everything, and left behind my weak and starving brother. So this day, I still don't know how long my brother survived or where he's buried. But grass was not greener on the side of the Thomson River. Once in China, I realized it had been sex trafficking and sold to Chinese men for 5,000 yuan. My brother was arrested and repatriated. I still don't know if he's alive or dead. I spent 6 isolating years in China as sex slavers, but I am not different. 80% North Korean women who escaped and human trafficking in Chinese men and who's exploited to them labor and sex. When I was in China, I first gave my son, who was deemed stateless because I was North Korean. The Declaration of Rights of the Child states every child is entitled to a nationality, but China government not acknowledged to entitled these children born to a North Korean woman. So thus left stateless and unable to official obtain papers. There are estimated 20,000 children in now China. They die in need of help, those whose parents are repatriated. This has happened to me in 2004. I was arrested and repatriated. My escaping was considered a political betrayal, so I was imprisoned, tortured, and re-educated. In prison, we are not human, we are animals. Also, North Korean government not accept the foreign child, so they killed the unborn baby in front of mother. I was sickness and malnutrition. 6 months after, I released in a camp, and I escaped again and reunited my son. I am lucky to alive tell this tale, as escapists just like me are considered to the enemies of the state and face the highest level of punishment. It is imperative that we end the repatriation of North Koreans from China. There is many interested North Korean refugees, but we often forget what life is like those left behind. They are just the people like you and me. It's only one difference is North Koreans don't have a voice. They are born in hell and grow up in slavers. Today I am here, not in my own name, Ji-hyun Park. My voice is victims of North Koreans and the survivors speaking of North Koreans. We need your empathy and need your help. I always talk my story, and I keep telling the one thing: share our story with your family and friends. This is why, because North Koreans deserve to write freely without the torture and the persecutions any countries they may choose to live. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jian, can I thank you for what you said there and for being so clear with us and how shocking your experience has been, and to be able to share that is incredible. But is there any rule of law on this at all in North Korea? Is there anything that people can go to, or is it just completely, this crime doesn't exist? Because why would it if you don't respect people?
Because in the world, always speak about the North Korea. They only politics and the nuclear weapons and missiles. They not speak about the people and the human rights issues. They always lost, especially women and the children. So when I heard my son's question, I just cried. And after I thought that this is not only my son's question. This is all North Korean children who now separated their families. So I stand up, fight again in brutal dictatorship, and I just always told in our world about our stories.
And do you think there should be more said about the stories of people like you who suffer? Do you think that should be the real stories about North Korea?
Yes, nowadays, but our voices are still the silence because many people still behind families in North Korea. So they just is scared about when they stand up, speak out, and maybe their families is punished inside North Korea. But so now is not many voices come out in outside. But I hopefully maybe next time is many North Korean women, especially like me, they stand up and speak out their voice.
Yeah, and we're very grateful that you are. Thank you. I want to move to Sarah now, who's going to speak from the floor. Sarah, obviously, you're from the UK, and as we heard, you were trafficked at a young age, from about 12. So could you tell us your experience? And, you know, we think in the UK, a very well-developed country with rule of law and systems. What was your experience, and did it work for you, the support?
From the age of 10 to 12, I was groomed by a gang within the UK. They befriended me and they seemed to really care for me. This was something that I was not experiencing anywhere else. I was a child in foster care from the age of 3 and had been moved multiple times to different homes. Each time with foster carers who should have but didn't care for me. Because of how alone and vulnerable I became their next prey. The gang owned a disused shop from which they illegally sold cheap cigarettes, alcohol and drugs. I started buying cigarettes from them and then also alcohol. At times, I didn't have to pay because I was a friend to them. That is where my debt bondage began. I saw them as people who cared about me when nobody came home for days. They would feed me and drive me to school. When I was sad, they would bring me gifts to cheer me up, which mainly consisted to be drugs, which they had introduced me to. That's when my dependency began. At a time where I had no love, support, or community, they provided it, something in which I craved. For 2 years, they were the nicest, smiliest, genuine friends or family that I had. But when I was 12, I was called to the shop, but this time there were no smiles or no friendly faces, but locked doors and angry ones. I was told that I owed them a debt for all of the items that they had given me for free and all of the gifts over the time they had increased that debt whenever they felt necessary. £75,000 was the amount that I owed. No child of 12 can find that kind of money. When I told them I couldn't pay them that kind of cash, they showed me a number of photos that they had of my family and loved ones going about their everyday lives, oblivious that they were being watched. They said if I didn't pay them, that they pay them back in the way that they wanted, then they would be shot. They told me that I belonged to them, and until my debt was cleared, I had to work for them. The first 2 weeks, I carried large quantities of drugs to various locations. As a child, this terrified me, so after 2 weeks, I refused to do it again. They got extremely violent and held me at gunpoint, telling me that they would now sell my body every day until that debt was paid, and if I told the police, it would be me being sent to prison for committing that crime, and they would also give police evidence that I was dealing drugs. My childhood was over. The next 7 years, I was sold every day to many different men. I would have a minimum of 7 clients a day, but that would usually go up to around 12 to 16. Throughout those years, I was completely overlooked. I was in a school, I had a social worker, I had foster carers. I was known to the police, but not one of them asked questions or seemed to care about what was right in front of them. Because of what I was forced to do, I became a very angry and rebellious teenager, getting in a lot of trouble all of the time, but nobody wanted to find out why. No one cared as to why a 14-year-old was seen working on the streets at 2 a.m, or why a 15-year-old is going into hotel rooms with older men, why a child was barely in school, or when she was exhausted. Because of the continual system failures, it took me 7 years to be seen. 7 years of torture, control, and hell. That should not have been the case. My trafficking gang had complete control over my life. They knew and dictated where I was every moment of the day. There was no time off. Even while on my Year 8 school trip to France, my traffickers had arranged for me to still work overnight while I was there. Yet still, nobody noticed me. Every professional failed me. Thankfully, I was rescued 4 years ago by one police officer that looked past the surface enough to see what was really happening. I was fortunate enough to be taken to a safe house and then be granted my positive conclusive grounds, which for a British survivor is not easy to obtain. The last 4 years have been a roller coaster of a journey, as trafficking is something that I will be recovering from for the rest of my life, which is why I'm extremely fortunate that I was supported by Snowdrop. They provide long-term support to survivors, and without their support, I would not be here today. I cannot begin to tell you the change and impact they have had on my life and my future. For once, I was seen, heard, held, and protected, something I didn't have with many of the other trafficking support services provided. There seemed to be a pattern throughout my life up until Snowdrop 2 years ago. System failure, even judicial failure. I had a court case and were extremely close to obtaining lengthy convictions until one of my perpetrators died and they closed my whole entire case. Failed and deserted again. Throughout my entire childhood and the first part of my freedom and recovery was system failure. If eyes were opened and questions were asked, then I wouldn't have had my childhood stolen by the most poisonous of men, and now living with the lifelong effects of those 7 years that should never have been.
Thank you, Sarah. And you talk about that so clearly, and having been what you've been through, it's amazing that you can actually explain that to such a large audience. But what was it that was different? You talk about all the failings that happened, and I obviously know some of those, and we've spoken about those. But what was it that was different when you went to Snowdrop and when you started to feel you were on the road to recovery?
For me, you are treated as an individual. You know, there's many clients that are supported, but it's by individual, you know, so they ensured that my needs of what I needed were looked at and were carefully, you know, things were carefully put into place that were appropriate for me to recover from what I had been through. And just the knowledge of, you know, though that it's going to be a long-term situation, they're not going to leave you in 3 months' time, or, you know, suddenly decide, well, I don't think you comply with our rules, we see you later, we don't want you. Regardless of your situation or circumstances, they stick by you, and that was extremely important.
And prior to that, entering that point then, did you not feel that you were able to do this? Did you not feel that anybody was really caring for you or listening to you?
No, not at all. I mean, for me, the first 2 years of my recovery, within a year, I lost my dad and then at a different time, my mum. And both sort of places that I were living at that were supporting me kicked me out within a month of losing them because I wasn't complying with what they wanted me to do.
And you did support a police investigation, and as you said, that at the end was dropped for some reason. How does that make you feel?
I'm kind of at a stopgap in some ways. You know, how are you supposed to move on when you know, people that have damaged your life so hugely and are still such a risk to you are still walking free. Every single day of my life is still in a lot of ways dictated by those people. And so I can say that I'm free, but in a lot of ways I'm not. I can't be on this stage because the risk could be too high. You know, freedom, it comes with its cost.
And so what would you like to see happen to those?
Justice.
What do you see as justice?
Prison sentences, you know, people taking action against what has been done to us, showing that actually all those years of people not caring, all those years of people that were supposed to protect us, then do that now. Now you know my story, now you know what they did. So you didn't protect me now, so now didn't protect me then, so do your job now and protect me and everybody else that needs protecting.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And just one thing I want to mention about Sarah and her recovery. Earlier this year, she asked me if I'd join her in a parachute jump for collecting money, and I said no, so she's actually a lot braver than me. But going back to what we're discussing, one of the things that we keep hearing is this kind of impunity that's there. And it's not just an impunity of what the outcomes are, it's an impunity that's real. And I suppose going back to you, Asif, talking about the Rohingya, is there any chance of justice for them in Bangladesh at the moment? And if you think there is, what is that? Or do you think there needs to be more done, and what should that be?
Yeah, I mean, listening to Sarah's story and her talking about system failure, that seems to be like a common theme across, no matter which country you are in. Because I will quickly show one case. If there is I know there's a picture for one victim. I mean, this was unearthed by a documentary filmmaker. Yes. So basically, this woman is a unregistered refugee who came in a previous influx in 2012. And suddenly one morning, she found her daughter was missing. And then after a few weeks, she got a phone call from her daughter who was in a brothel in Calcutta. She was desperate. She wanted to come back. She wanted an escape route. And then there was no trace of her. Then after a few months, her daughter was discovered in a train station in Andhra Pradesh in India. And there will be a picture of the daughter as well. And then a documentary filmmaker happened to basically find this Yasmin, the girl, in a shelter in India. And then on his own volition, came to Bangladesh and tracked the mother down, and then basically connected them via phone. And now this was 3 years ago. And 3 years, she's in this institution, in this shelter in India, trying desperately to get back with her mother together. And I just visited her mother like 2 weeks ago before I came. He's just indescribable. He just continues to cry, just looks at the picture and stuff. But the system failure is the common thing. You know, she's going to agencies, she's going to governments, but this repatriation and unification is not happening. And we just recently got the case, so we are going to take some initiative. But again, if she mentioned a police officer who scratched over the surface, in this case, this was a documentary filmmaker. So the system keeps repeatedly failing. And just going back to your issue of the Rohingya situation, I don't think they're going to get justice, unfortunately, because, you know, this supposed champion of democracy and human rights, Aung San Suu Kyi, when she goes to Rakhine and says that don't quarrel with each other, when there are mass killings, there are stories of children being thrown into live fire happening, and there's denial from that from an institutional level of such ethnic cleansing. I don't think we can expect justice. But what's important is, you know, raising this issue. I don't think people are aware exactly the scale of the proportion of the violence.
We spoke about this last night, the numbers of people.
Yeah, and what makes it very interesting, the dynamics, is that the number of women and children in this violence. I mean, in just women from age 6 to 17, numbers around 89,000. And we have about 33,000 unaccompanied children who both their parents are missing. So you can imagine how they are going to be basically the victims of trafficking that's going to happen if their proper precaution and cannot be.
So, I mean, thinking about the scale, and come to all of you on this, the scale of this issue, we hear about individual cases that there's failure that we should be responding to, the cases that are smaller. And I think you mentioned, Ajit, about we will need to deal with the here and now, the short term. Maybe we're reaching for the stars and we're missing the diamonds at our feet. But what would you say from your perspective, if there was one thing you would like to see change then, obviously with the big scale in India, what would it be? What could make that change that is the here and now?
Well, I think in this lifetime, I'm not being pessimist, the way things are in India right now, there can be a growth rate and shares going up and down, but when it comes to human lives, I don't think in the near future there will be some charismatic change. But one thing that I really believe in is the people's power. By instinct, we are questioning people. We must be questioning people as we are having here. We are questioning in one way, okay? And I think this is one thing that will make the government answerable, and that will push for more innovation and change in societies, Because if people stop questioning, then there's a serious problem, I feel, And right now the problem I see is, okay, from the government side it's fine, but from the people's perspective, when I see, they feel, these girls are this way only, okay? That's what's happening basically, unreported. Why? Because we people, when we talk, this, does this happen? So my neighbor would also say, does this happen really? So the question that I'm trying to raise is, we as civil society people, NGOs are representative, we must, let people question it, I think. And the people questioning is very dangerous even for the politicians and the governments,
So on that then, the UK legislation has a supply chain transparency legislation, which requires business to do statements, those that trade over 36 million. And I know that the sex trafficking and those issues are different to the business, and they need to be dealt with in a really much a rule of law way because of the criminality. But particularly from India and Bangladesh, a lot of the trafficking is related to business, and we know that that's in the, what is the legitimate business world. Do you think that push, the engagement of business, has got the potential of making that change?
In Bangladesh, there is absolutely. I mean, the lessons from Rana Plaza has been that because the biggest push came from the buyers who were forced to push because of the huge civil society pressure from this part of the world, led to a huge compliance changes and sweeping changes across the sector. And that just goes to show that the power of people that Ajit was mentioning, Kailash was mentioning the same thing, and across the borders. I mean, it's not just, in that part of the world. And in this globalized world, all the issues are connected. And with technology, with social media now, it's possible more than ever.
But Jessica, in respect of the sex trafficking issues that you're talking about in the US, where do you think the opportunities are to address that kind of exploitation? I mean, is it education? Is it around empowerment of women? Is it around rule of law, or is it a raft of measures?
It's education first and foremost, because you have to educate everyone to understand. Because most people, they'll look at these men and women that are on the street and they're just like, oh, whatever. They're doing this on their own. They don't see what's not in front of them. They don't understand that there's somebody forcing them to do this. So education is the number one thing that we need. But number two, law enforcement needs to take their view of this, and they need to turn it around, because right now they're punishing the victims and they're not going after their traffickers.
Yeah.
They're quicker to punish a woman or a man that they find that's being trafficked on the street, but they won't go to the root. They won't go to the trafficker.
And why does that happen? Is that a cultural issue in the statutory agencies? Is it they don't understand the vulnerability? Or is it a choice that they think we don't want to go there?
They're not putting in the amount of work and investigative work to get to that point. It's easier for them to do a roundup every couple months and pull in as many people as they can that they pull off the street and then convict them, punish them. You know, at some points they're even punishing children. We're talking like 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and they're labeling them with these names, and they're giving them these records, and they're not helping them. We're fortunate enough in Columbus that we have a thing called Catch Court, where we have a judge who's actually trying to help these women to get off the street, to clear their record, and be in programs to get themselves away from that. But the worst thing with our law enforcement is when they do these roundups and they arrest these women and these men, the minute these men and women are getting out of jail, sometimes it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, those traffickers are just sitting there waiting. Yeah. They know when they're getting out. We have a online system where you can put in anybody's name and it'll tell you when they get released. So they're right back there picking them up. They're sending girls and men in to rehabs to recruit.
And does it need a rethink in legislation, or does it just need a task force? Is the legislation in your state sufficient to deal with that, or does it just need a whole rethink?
It is not sufficient. It needs a rethought. It needs to be replanned. They need to take a different take on it.
And do you think the US now, with a global fund that it's announced, which is going to be looking at some of the issues we spoke here, do you think that's going to make a difference?
I hope so. I hope that more people are open to understanding and educating themselves. I mean, honestly, before Jennifer had told me the things that had happened to her, and I met with other women that her trafficker had trafficked, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know anything about it. Nobody's educating you there. Nobody's talking about it. It's this big, quiet secret that nobody wants to say anything about. And it needs to be brought to attention. And our government doesn't want to talk about it either. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that we have a problem.
So I think we look at the common theme we're hearing, wherever it may be, is perhaps the response isn't as serious as it needs to be. Perhaps we're not seeing this for what it is, which is a violation of human beings being traded as a commodity. And I think that's something we've heard across everyone. And that unless this fits into all the state responses, unless the support mechanisms are there, unless the health needs are dealt with, unless the mental health issues are dealt with, and there needs to be a law enforcement response, it's going to be very difficult to deal with this, whether it's in Bangladesh, India, United States, North Korea, or in the United Kingdom. So what I want to do now is, obviously, with that in mind, and obviously the accounts we've heard, turn it to the floor to get questions from you, obviously, so that we can start to really explore the experience that we've got here on this panel. So we've got a gentleman there.
Over there.
So, if you could say who you are and where you're from, and if we can go quickly to the questions, because we want to get through as many as possible.
I have a question for Sarah. Sarah, do you expect to get any justice from the perpetrators? I mean, are they ever going to be? He died and the case was closed. That doesn't seem right. Kevin, is that right, that the case would be closed because
Sure.
a perpetrator died?
Could you just tell everyone where you're from, please?
Oh, sorry, my name's Megan Stewart. I'm a consultant and trainer in human trafficking, primarily with homeless victims.
Thank you, Megan. Sarah?
I don't know the answer to that one. I had hope at one point that they would, but it's been dealt with so badly that, who knows? In my views, it shouldn't make a difference if one of them dies, because, a crime that's committed by each individual, that individual person is held accountable for. So in my opinion, it makes no difference whether, one person dies. There were plenty more people involved in it, and they should be held accountable for it. But it doesn't seem to be taken as seriously or dealt with in the way that it should have been. So I really don't know.
Okay, Megan, from my perspective, we really need to, look at this. And it's one of the issues as Commissioner that I can look at why these failings are happening and ask for things to be looked at again. So we're working very closely with Sarah on this issue. The next question.
Yeah, my name is working.
Hello, my name is Joe Machado Torres. I'm a researcher and a lawyer in Toulouse, France. I'll start by my question saying to Sarah and for all the people, how can we see the unseen of the abuse of sexual and everything that's happened to you? Because as you said, the government or the police seem not to help you, but how can we see and help other people in that situation to see the unseen? It's not visible all the time. And all the stories were very touching. I feel like I want to apologize, Sarah, in the name of all the men who did what they did to you, because I think you are a precious princess of God. And I really want to tell you that what happened to you should never happen to anyone. It's just profound. I'm just profound touched with your story. And I think and I hope that your thoughts and your strength will be renewed. And I wish the best for you.
So thank you. So I suppose the question there was, how can we find the unseen, really, the people who are hidden? I mean, very much in all the nations that we're talking about. But is it a case that we're not even looking and finding the ones that we know about, let alone finding the ones that are very difficult to find? Because sometimes it's there in front of us.
I think we don't have to, we've just talked in America. I didn't know it, frankly speaking. What's happening here in UK, in America, you know, I thought it's only happening in India. So, but the point is, you know, we don't have to wait for these agencies or systems to function, you know. We have to get, like, bi-yearly reports we come out with on the police misconduct. But sadly enough, I submitted the entire report to the chief minister, and it's still lying in the rack, you know. But what I'm trying to say is, just don't wait for any ideal moment. We can investigate. We can get into, like, for 14 months I was with a spy camera in the Allahabad brothels, you know. And we collected so much evidence that I think 61 brothels were seized there. You know, they had to do it. They had to do it, you know. So the point is, you take things to a level where even the government or the state is in a position to say, yes, okay, we'll do it now, okay? Because we can't wait for that ideal moment, you know.
So, I mean, you, Sarah, you were a child, and there were other children involved. And we do know now there's an issue in the United Kingdom called county lines, where children are used to traffic drugs, boys and girls, but very much boys. Why were you not seen? Why were you and the other children that were there not seen?
Good question.
Yeah.
Because I should have been. Because as a child, you should be seen every day. We have schools for a reason. We have social workers for a reason. You know, these people are put in place to look after, to protect, and to see children. So it shouldn't be that we're not seen.
I suppose what I'd like to ask you is, now you're out of that situation, do you think it should have been obvious to people? And was it a case of people were just not doing their job?
Yeah. I couldn't have made it at times any more obvious with putting my own life on the line by doing so. You know, I couldn't make it any more obvious. If you were a police officer walking down the street and you see a 13-year-old child at 2 a.m, dressed in barely any clothes, getting out of a car of a 60-year-old man.
And did that happen to you?
Yeah, is that not wrong? Is that not something that should be looked at? You know, it's people not doing their jobs, or being scared to look into, you know, something that maybe is unknown but is becoming more known.
We've got another question.
Thank you very much for everyone that have shared their story. My name is Bisi Anime, and I'm just extremely moved. I'm in shock. And I think one of the things that kept coming out from this discussion, it's asking the victim, how did it happen to you? What happened to you? Who did this to you? There's never been a point in any of this discussion that has been following, not here, for a long time, where those people in power have taken responsibilities for what has been done. There's never been a time when politicians and police officers and people who have power have come out with their hands up and said, we have failed these people. Nobody is taking responsibility. But more importantly, in the United Kingdom, what happens when your oppressor, when your trafficker, is the people that will decide the law on trafficking? We have that in the UK Parliament, where prominent politicians were themselves sex traffickers. And how can there be justice when the people that will determine your freedom are actually the people that are oppressing you?
So, firstly, I suppose you're putting that from the UK perspective, and that's part of the role of having an independent anti-slavery commissioner to hold all those agencies to account. And if you read my annual report, that's what I do. But I think you're absolutely right. If it's the people in power that are causing this, and I think from your perspective, we've heard that quite a bit from Bangladesh and from India. And I think we've heard it also from the US. I don't know, from Jessica, from your perspective, you explained to me last night that sometimes that is the big issue.
Sometimes these traffickers are police officers, sometimes they're judges, sometimes, you know, they're in a political position, and they use that power to cover up what they're doing. I've seen, you know, anything from a landlord to a elected official, a mayor, you know, of a city who is holding girls, you know, of age or not, and using them in his own home as the mayor. And nobody does anything about it.
And I know from the perspective you will see there has been cases in the United Kingdom where there have been, for example, people who work for the police involved in trafficking rings, and they have gone to prison. But actually, if they are being missed in the cases like Sarah, it shows that we have a lot more to do. Could we have another question there, please?
Hello, Sister Linda Dearlove, and I run a service that works with women who have been victims of trafficking and of prostitution. And I think the thing that we are failing to name is the actual system of the sex trade. These women that we're speaking of have all been victims that relate to demand, the demand of the sex trade that is paying for sex and is seeing these women as just another commodity. And I think Kevin alluded to it earlier when he talked about supply chain. The issue of the supply chain that will never be seen in terms of the sex trade is the fact that it's serious and organised crime. And so those big numbers and those big amounts of money that are moved around actually are hidden. And I think when we're talking about the perpetrators, I would just be interested, because across all of these different countries, the sex trade has been named. And really the perpetrators are those people who are willing to pay for sex. From 12-year-olds, from 13-year-olds who have a demand. That is actually childhood sexual abuse. And we need to be able to name it. Because part of the issue, I've worked for 35 years on the streets with women. And I have been part of rescuing 12-year-olds and fighting with social services. So I'd be asking the people who are on the panel just to say how they feel about the role of demand in what's happening and how it fuels the trade that traffickers are moving women into.
Thank you, Linda. So if I come from the start of North Korea, for example, is there a demand for sex in North Korea? And is it driven by the demand, do you think? Or is it more complex than that?
In North Korea, they were allowed about the human trafficking or sex exploitations because the government announced that this is an illegal job. So many North Korean women, women and girls escaped to North Korea because they wanted to survive to another country. So once in China, they just is kidnapped in Chinese border area, and they human trafficking, sold to Chinese men, and also sex exploitations. But once we sold to out the Chinese men, they never allowed to us family members. They just only look to us sex players and the labor workers. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jessica, from the perspective, the question that Linda has asked, do you think that causes the problem, the demand?
Oh, definitely. You know, if there's no demand, there's no need for the supply. I mean, you know, we've got plenty of, you know, people who are out there who are paying for these services, and they need to be charged just as quickly as any trafficker. but they're not going after them either. And when they do, they don't put their names in the paper. They don't put their pictures out there. They're putting the victims out there.
Yeah.
So if you can end the demand, essentially you're ending the supply.
And Sarah, from your perspective, you talk about all the times that you were traded and exploited as a child. Did you ever know any of those people being brought to justice?
No, never.
As a child?
Those people, they don't even get included in, in the system of prosecutions. It's only the traffickers, never once anybody else included.
And do you think the criminals that were exploiting you and controlling you, do you think if there wasn't a demand, do you think they would do it?
No, because they wouldn't have anything to sell, because there wouldn't be anyone to buy it.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously demand, when we talk about supply chains, we need to think about the wider supply chains potentially across all areas of exploitation, which is why we talk about labour, we talk about car washes, nail bars, the sexual exploitation in the supply chains of businesses. We need to be aware of all of the exploitation and demand that's there. I think we have another question over there. Sorry.
The last one.
Yeah, my name is Dietmar Roller from International Justice Mission in Germany. We work in an area where we have figured out that as poor people do not have access to the health system of the country or the education system of the country, they do not have access to the law enforcement system of the country. It's not functioning for the poor people. We learned that one can do something in collaboration, but my question goes in another direction. If we look into humanitarian crises, whether they are disasters, man-made or normal cost disasters, we have intervention systems like bringing food, like bringing water, like giving shelter, but so far we have no one in this humanitarian first help areas who really go in as a lawyer, as someone else who looks into the issue, what's going on exploitation. And we have just talked about the Rohingya issue, where we know there are gang rapes from soldiers in Myanmar, that nearly no girl, child, or a woman is reaching Bangladesh without being raped, without being trafficked, that it is a gruesome system going on, and yet there is no intervention on the side of having lawyers, having people into the humanitarian system from UN or somewhere else taking this issue immediately up. It's there, it's talked about, but is it not time to look into a system?
Shall we ask the people on the panel then? Do you think that's what's needed?
Yeah, is it not time to bring in a system now looking in this?
Sure.
Absolutely. I think it's a very valid point that initially the natural tendency is to, of course, look at health and food crisis. But as we're finding out there, we don't have enough resources to deal with gender-based violence issues. And there are not only exploitation happens from where they came from, but the exploitation happens by the host country people. Exploitation happens by the aid workers as well. I mean, that's a very common phenomenon as well. So again, dealing with the sensitivity, dealing with also the legal aspect, there's simply not enough resources.
And I think also to highlight that the United Nations have to report on this to the Secretary General about the responses around peacekeeping and the humanitarian responses, and that report's got to be submitted by the end of the year.
And so what?
Sorry?
So what will happen?
Well, there'll be a report for the UN as to what they should do internationally, and it should actually pick up on the very things that we're talking about, the actual things that we're talking about. What is the UN response about putting this within each humanitarian response and each peacekeeping operation, particularly for the issues that you talk about? That's what the ask is going to be. But it's going to have us to push that. So we're coming to the end now. I'd like to thank all of the panel members. I think it's been a fantastic panel. I would like to thank each and every one of you for what you're doing. The work you are doing is changing lives, saving lives, and I hope that we can all in this room help you to improve what you're doing, to make it easier so that you can save more of those lives, protect more of those lives, and I really do thank you. Just to let you know that there is lunch now And I think Monique will tell you about what time we're due to be back. So thank you very much to the panel.
Take a good time to lunch, and you should be back at 12:15. Thank you. Oh, yeah. That's fine. That's fine. Nothing.
Okay, go back
Stupid shoes. That's fine. Just the shoes. Where is that?
Whoever is this one. Let's get you. Johnny, this way.